Hi, everyone. My name is Ericka McCoy. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Resonate. And I am really, really excited to share this conversation with you. As our lovely MC mentioned, we had a chance to talk about some really interesting topics that are becoming so important for marketing leaders. And Katie is going to share some really interesting stories that she's in her experience. Really quickly, I would say here at Resonate, we've been tracking consumer values and how consumers feel about brands, whether it's sustainability or social justice, or there's even Roe versus Wade. Consumers are now shopping and supporting or not supporting brands that have a stand. So thinking about that, it's really exciting to hear about Haleon and how you've built a brand with transformation coming from big CPG, but putting purpose at the center of everything you do. So could you tell us a little bit about that transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Katie Williams. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Haleon here in the U.S. And how many people in the audience know who Haleon is? That tracks. So Haleon is actually, so how many people know Advil? Sensodyne, Theraflu, Robitussin, Tums, Chapstick. Yeah, so that's Haleon. So Haleon actually is a consumer health business. It was launched in July of this year. I actually had the pleasure of being able to stand at the New York Stock Exchange and ring the bell with our CEO, Brian McNamara. And it is a combination of what used to be GSK consumer health business, Pfizer consumer health, and some of the Novartis business. So those consumer health portfolios were all combined into what is now Haleon, which was spin-off from the GSK parent in July of this year. So it is now the first and largest global standalone consumer health business. And the amazing thing about Haleon that we were able to do was we were able to decide who we were going to be at that moment. There's not many times where you get to be involved in this case, $14 billion startup. And define who you will be when you launch that company. And that's what we were able to do with Haleon. I personally have been able to do this twice. I spent 20 years at Kraft, which ultimately became Mondelez. And so had the opportunity to be involved in one of those separations in the past. So this is my second time, once in a lifetime experience. I joined Haleon 2 years ago. And the reason I joined is when I talked to Brian McNamara, when he was talking to me about the role, he started first and foremost with purpose. We are building this company to deliver better everyday health with humanity. Everyone at our company knows what our purpose is inspired by that ambition, and builds brand plans and business objectives around that objective. We have 3 key pillars in which we will deliver better everyday health with humanity. It's making everyday health more inclusive, so everyone has access to the healthcare that they need. And we look to make sure that we're doing our best to serve the underserved. Making everyday health more achievable. So for those that may not have the same abilities as what we would typically think of when we're designing our products, we make sure we're including everybody in the design and ensuring that whether you're older or younger, you have low vision, you have the ability to engage with our products and deliver against your everyday health goals. And then finally, making everyday health more sustainable. The impact to our environment impacts our health, and we need to make sure, as the world's leading standalone consumer health business, that we care for the environment as we're helping to grow our businesses. Everything we do is focused on that from day one. It's built into our DNA, it's built into how we behave, and it's built into how we grow our business.
And I think it's so interesting because a lot of times we'll get asked, what does it mean to be, align my brand values to consumer values? Or how can I really do that and be authentic? And in talking to you and this experience that you've been through, second time, but much more purpose oriented, I think. I think everyone would like to understand, how do you operationalize? How do you lead a team and operationalize marketing truly to be around a purpose?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I say this knowing that, again, we were in a unique position. We could build it from the ground up, so to say, right? But there are definitely things that we've done that can and should be applied to your business if you're considering a truly purpose-led approach to how you grow your business. First, it's built into our strategy. So our number one strategic objective is to deliver better everyday health with humanity. That's on the top of everything we do, and everything stems from that. Second, it's built into our behaviors. So we have very clear cultural behaviors. So we think about what kind of culture we want to design that will support that purpose-led. So there's 3 key behaviors that we focus on. The first one is keeping it human. So we have to treat each other like we would treat, not thinking about, business and analytics, but thinking about the human and creating a culture of empathy. For us, empathy, how we define that is the intersection between humility and curiosity. You have to be humble enough to know when you don't know something, and curious enough to learn. So we spend a lot of time focusing on that humility and curiosity to make sure that we keep it human. The second is we do what matters most. If it doesn't align with that purpose agenda, if it won't allow us to deliver better everyday health with humanity, we question and ask, is that something that we should be doing? And we shift our prioritizations to really anchor on that. And then finally, it's going beyond. We look beyond our 4 walls to make sure that when we're designing things, we're not designing them in a bubble. We're bringing partners along with us that are also have shared agendas in this space. And we're making sure that we're continuing to lead in the market versus follow. So absolutely starts with our strategy, built in our behaviors, and then we put some real things into action. The first choice we made as a new company was to change our parental leave policy. So at Haleon, every person is eligible for 26 weeks of paid parental leave. That is the first of its kind in our industry, and really ahead of most people in the industry. 26 weeks paid, that's basically, it's 6 months paid MAT or PAT leave. And it doesn't matter how you come about being a parent, whether you are adopting or surrogacy or, however you come about to be a parent, you're eligible for this 26 weeks paid. So we really put it into action first and foremost as soon as we launched.
I mean, that says a lot. As someone who's led a global team, I always felt bad for the mothers in the United States or the parents in the United States, because the other countries are so generous. And it's like, sorry, you're having the baby here. In Sweden, they're going to be off for 2 years. But I think, putting your values at the center of what you do and having the behaviors, even in just the culture you're creating, is super, super important. And I think sometimes people think it's just on paper, right? But what you're describing is how you systematically brought it into the marketing team. And maybe you could talk a little bit about when it comes to measurement of performance, right? Because that's, at the end of the day, we have that performance component to everything we do. How do the marketing metrics align to values? Or is values did we stay consistent to our kind of our values, one of the checkpoints when you're looking at, your CPA and other things? Like, how do you bring those two together?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So a couple of things that we've done more recently, one of our goals again is to deliver better everyday health more inclusively. And so we have identified and defined who are those consumer cohorts that we think we need to drive more growth with that potentially have been underserved. So whether in our case, it may be Black or Hispanic consumers, there's also lower income consumers that we have identified as key key consumer cohorts that we need to serve better than maybe we have been serving in the past. And so a key metric that we look at is household penetration with those consumer cohorts. Are we driving growth? Are we connecting more? We also, when we look at our brand health metrics, we look specifically at the consumer cohorts that we want to serve better and understand how they are, how we're tracking with those long-term brand health metrics. And we've included things like, does it align with my values? Do I see myself in the work that they're doing? So those are two key things, particularly in the inclusive side, that we make sure that we're tracking. We're also holding our partners accountable. We have a pretty specific targets as it relates to diversity end to end in our creative supply chain. And we very early on discussed with our partners what our expectations were, what we were trying to do in terms of delivering diversity and inclusion, for example, inside our doors, but the help we needed from them to do that as well. So changes in our media buying so that we can, include more diverse owned and operated networks and platforms in our media buys, or increasing the percentage of diverse creators that are doing our work. All of those things are embedded and tracked as we try to deliver our agenda with purpose.
Right. I mean, it's awesome. I want to come back to humanity. Here at Resonate, we call it the human element. But I think, again, sometimes people, what does it truly mean to deliver with humanity? I think you have some really great programs that bring it to life for the audience. Could you share some of those really human-centric marketing?
Yeah. So one thing we talk about is it's important. Yes, we do a lot of purpose saying. We state our strategy with purpose, but more importantly, we want to make sure that we're purpose doing. So what are some really key tangible things that show that we are building our business and building our brands with purpose? So one example, and we think about all our stakeholders, employees with the new Pat Lee, for example. We just partnered with The Economist to develop the first health inclusivity index, which was a measure that was designed by The Economist to measure how inclusive countries were around the world in their healthcare. There was 40 countries that were included initially in the first round of this index. This is an index now that sets the standard for what health inclusivity should be. It's across 3 different metrics. One is infrastructure. So what does the health infrastructure look like in your country? Policy. What are the policies around health and self-care in your country? And do you have policies that will enable inclusive healthcare? And then finally, community and services, and do you have the right community and service support in your country? We launched that last week. I am not so pleased to say that the U.S. landed at the 11th place.
Wow.
Out of the 40 countries. It's not because we don't spend a lot of money on healthcare. We actually spend some of the largest expenditures on healthcare in the world. And they did find that in this index that spending doesn't necessarily correlate with inclusivity from a healthcare perspective. Where we probably have the biggest opportunity is in our policies and in our community outreach. So that's places where we will focus. As a company that's really focused on consumer healthcare, we are really engaged with helping to steer policy in the right direction. We're also very engaged in working with community partners to drive inclusivity where it's needed in our country. But this index is really going to be something that will be used as a measure for us as a country and around the world for what inclusive healthcare looks like. Another thing we just launched is in partnership with Microsoft, Seeing AI. I don't know about you guys, but I've got 2 young sons. Sometimes they get sick. In the middle of the night, I'm trying to read a label. It's impossible, right? Well, if you're blind or low vision, this is your day every day. And the most important thing for people who are blind or low vision is independence. They don't want to have to ask people, to help them with day-to-day tasks that any, adult or human should be able to do. Seeing AI is a technology that was developed by Microsoft that allows you to scan items algorithms and be able to listen to your label, for example. But products weren't included in the capability for seeing AI, products like ours. So we loaded, in partnership with Microsoft, all of our products, 1,500 products available on Haleon, into the Seeing AI application and improved the user experience so that blind and low vision people can engage with our packaging whenever they need. So those are a couple of things that we've done early on as we've launched.
And they're just really awesome kind of strategic endeavors. And then there's even campaigns that you're doing that really bring the humanity into medicine. And so, you think about what does that actually look like? How does it manifest itself? I think the TheraFlu program is a great example of that.
Yeah, it was interesting during COVID, as you can imagine. TheraFlu is a brand that, in its brand heart, they really want to fight for a flu-safe world. And as you can imagine, in the last 2 years, that couldn't have been more relevant than any other time. The reality was, though, in the past, they had talked about, hey, you need to rest and recover. Everyone should rest and recover and take the time, and focusing on these busy lives. And TheraFlu is a brand that wanted them to take the time to rest and recover. During COVID, it became very obvious that everybody doesn't have that privilege. And you recognize that it really was a privilege to be able to rest and recover. Because the reality is 25% of Americans don't have access to paid sick leave. And they had to work every day despite the fact that they were sick. So we changed our focus to not just about preaching about resting and taking the time and relaxing and making sure you're caring for yourself, but working with a partner, the Good Plus Foundation, to create a micro grant that would give women and families that didn't have access to paid sick leave access to those wages if they needed to take time off when they were sick. And we changed the conversation to making rest and recovery a right and not a privilege. And we're continuing to work and expanding that micro grant with TheraFlu. And it's a very relevant and important conversation to be had.
Yeah, I love that. So we talked a little bit about Haleon in the beginning. I think one of the things that's probably a big challenge for brand marketers is how do you manage such a robust portfolio of brands, and yet now you've built this top brand? And it obviously has a lot of, it stands for something and you're going to invest in it. How do you think about that? The new brand, relatively new brand, right? And all of your portfolio of strong brands, how do they work together?
Yeah, no. So the question I asked in the very beginning is just that, right? So Haleon, I asked, is anybody familiar with Haleon? I think we got like 2 or 3 hands in the room. And then when I mentioned our consumer brands, I think everybody in the room had their hand up at least once, and probably have them in their home. And so our brand portfolio, our consumer brands, is the heart of our company and really is what creates the value and the connection and the opportunity for us to deliver better everyday health with humanity. But we live in a world where we have to attract talent. We have to ensure that investors understand who we are. We have to make sure that we can engage with all of our stakeholders, whether it's customers or policymakers, with that Haleon brand. And we need to make sure that there's awareness around who we are, what we do, and how we want to impact the world. So we have to build both at the same time. I have an amazing global CMO, Tamara Rogers. Her role is really to make sure that she's bringing that Haleon brand to life in a big way, and we partner with her in the local markets to bring that to life. And my responsibility is really making sure we bring that to life, as well as nurturing and building our consumer brands.
And if you were to take it a step deeper, if you are one of the brand managers in Advil, let's say, how do they make their decisions, or what's the framework they're working within? Just because I think it's probably practical for some of the people here.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too that we've now started to do, I talked about this culture of empathy. Well, we're building into how we're briefing our businesses as well. So we have a new brief. It's our Haleon Humanity brief, and it really starts with understanding how can we breathe life first and foremost with the appropriate consumer insight. The insight, for example, that I mentioned around TheraFlu. Those are the kinds of insights that we're asking our brand teams to really better understand. What's the why behind the behaviors that we're seeing, and will our brands, based on where our brand heart is, be relevant in that space? So they spend a lot of time trying to understand what their brand heart is. Spending much more time on the consumer insight phase so they can get to the true why behind the behavior, and then look for those opportunities for allies and partners to be able to engage in spaces that matter to our consumers.
How much of the finding the why, which, by the way, favorite, because we say the same thing, why, the why is the most important thing, and often the hardest to get from a data perspective. How much of the research on that generates comes from your organization? How much do you depend on your agencies or other partners to help you get to that different set of data? Because now you're orienting yourself differently, you're briefing them differently. Is it more coming from your organization, or do you depend on the agencies to be able to bring that different type of insight?
I'd say it's both. We talk a lot about blind spots. So, empathy, again, the way we describe it is that intersection between curiosity and humility. Humility starts with knowing, like, I might have a blind spot here. Maybe I don't really understand this. Empathy is not being able to relate with somebody and, hey, we have the same experience. No, usually you don't have the same experience, but you're humble enough to know that and curious enough to learn, right? And that's true empathy. And so we spend a lot of time focusing on that humility. What do we not know? Do we really understand this as well as we should? We embedded, so for example, I talked about some of the cohorts that were the underrepresented cohorts we're trying to make sure we're building plans that resonate more with those cohorts. Well, we had to do an audit. We created an audit process that allowed us to understand, are we really building cultural relevancy into the work that we're putting out in the world? What does that look like? It's not enough just to have representation in our work, but are we culturally relevant? And so we designed and created an index in partnership with an external agency to evaluate all the work that we're doing, to say, is it relevant culturally? If not, what should we be? Where are our gaps? And how can we learn more so that we can eliminate those gaps in terms of connecting with our consumers? So we use both, but we first and foremost start with that kind of blind spot identification.
Yeah, I love the acknowledgement that there is the blind spot. I think we have so much data, but there's big gaps in the data we have that may not get us to how we're making our brand more human or being more empathetic. So I appreciate how the challenge of trying to put those pieces together and holding your partners accountable too, which I think is pushing them to find new sources of data to get to this point. I think one thing that I found interesting is just, this is not just a purpose-built company, but it's also a purpose for you. And, it's inspiring, I think, when you have leaders who have not only leading from great, marketing experience, but actually taking a job and leading into this purpose-built organization. It's such an exciting opportunity. Do you mind sharing just a little bit of, what led you to take this job? Because it was in the heart of the pandemic.
It was, yes. I was one of those people that they talked about when they said the Great Resignation. How many people were part of the Great Resignation? Let me see. A few. Yeah, a few. I definitely was. So I got the call about Haleon. I was at Mondelez, as I mentioned. I'd been there for 20 years, loved it, and had been doing well there and continuing to enjoy my experience there. But I got the call about Haleon in June of 2020. And if you guys can remember, June of 2020, it was the middle of the pandemic. It was the middle of Black Lives Matter and our realization, the country's realization, not everyone in the country, but a lot of people in the country's first time realizing the struggles and the atrocities that were happening in Black communities and brown communities with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. I have 2 young Black sons. And I, as a mother, at this point was starting to feel like maybe a woman who has the breast cancer gene. My kids are cute now, and everybody loves them. But one day, this might explode in my face. And it was terrifying terrifying. And so I was definitely at a point where I was just thinking about life, and I wanted to make an impact on my kids' lives more than what I was doing today. Don't get me wrong. My boys love going to school telling everybody their mom makes Oreos and Sour Patch Kids. And they really are struggling now telling their friends their mom sells drugs. But it was really important for me to have an impact in a different way. I got the call. Brian told me his objective and how purpose-led it will be. And I mentioned this was a time, obviously, we all remember, of the pandemic and the lockdown. And we were also very clear, not only on the terrorism and violence that were happening in certain communities, but also the disparities in healthcare. And I felt this was my moment and my opportunity where I could have a very real and meaningful impact on that, and was really the reason I decided to join, and the motivation I continue to have to deliver against our purpose.
Yeah, I just think we don't always get to align like our own personal values with our work values and what our brand stands for. And I think it's a really awesome example of that. So thank you so much.
Well, I hope you guys all are excited about Haleon now. And yes,
if you guys want to follow and see what they're doing, there's so many great campaigns they're running, and you're going to feel the humanity and everything that they're doing. So it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully you guys enjoyed. You can get maybe Katie for a couple minutes before she scoots out.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks to the Brand Innovators for allowing me to share the stage with this wonderful woman for a little bit.